Hi, I'm Melissa with the Melissa Carbonell Group at The Real Brokerage. In this next video, you're going to see me interview our Florida State Representative, Chip La Marca, and he's over Florida House District 100.
Beautiful, and we're recording.
Hi.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Okay, so you guys know me, Melissa Carbonell, and you've probably seen some of my webinars about the Florida Condo Safety Law, SB 4D. So we invited Chip La Marca here today. I happen to know Chip from when he was running for Broward County Commissioner in 2010.
2010, right. Goes back a little bit.
A long time. And now he is our state representative, Florida House District 100.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
Yeah. District 100 includes a significant portion of condominiums, so it's an important issue, and I'm glad you're talking about it.
A ton. There are not a lot of realtors talking about it. I think it's so much information. It's just a lot to even talk about, right?
It is, and I think we'll get into the meat of what we passed in special session, and then also the cleanup bill.
Yeah.
Which was really, for me, it was most important because it dealt with reality.
Yeah, the first one scared me. So, as most of you know, my background is I'm a real estate broker. I came from a mortgage background, but also I was president on a condo board where I own a condominium, and we went through major construction, engineers, architects, dealt with all of the things. So when the first bill came, I was like, uh-oh, this is going to be a problem. But it got better. It was, clearly it was a, I don't want to use the wrong term, but it was a abrupt reaction to a terrible incident at Surfside. We understand why we did it, and there was a lot of conversation about practicality of implementation and what we really put in it. How could we keep people safe and also not run them out of their condos? Yeah, I agree. I think that it's the right thing. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing. And in the end, it'll be a good thing.
Right.
But it just needed some modification, which you guys already took care of. So obviously the bill was put into place because of Champlain, Surfside, and because of the collapse. And I think at the time, Miami and Broward were the only ones who had 40 and 50-year inspections on condominiums. Now we have the majority of them and the oldest.
But I've been dealing with the 40-year inspection, not just on condos, but on commercial buildings. My background's construction, and I actually did work along the Gulf as well as all the way down to the continuum on South Beach and all the way north to Palm Beach, and certainly Broward and Miami-Dade. We had buildings that were say aging out. I just got back from Europe where buildings are 1,000, 2,000 years old, and but ultimately, we had buildings that we wanted to make sure that all the the critical infrastructure was still safe.
Yeah. So right now, the way the bill stands, the people it affects. So who does it affect?
So condominiums are cooperatives that are 3 stories or taller. And we'll get a little clarification on where the first story starts, because we have buildings that have a 3, 4, 5, 7-story podium, garage, and things like that. So we're clarifying that, but also it affects buildings that are along the coast as well as inland. That 25 versus 30-year issue will be worked out at the local level, but ultimately it affects condominium dwellers 3 stories and up.
Did they ever define the coast, whether it was the intracoastal coastline or the beach coastline?
So that is also going to be left up to local ordinances to make that determination. The big issue there, as you can imagine, is a condominium that might sit in West Palm or in say Weston Broward or Miramar. It's going to have some different weather effects than a condominium that sits here. My mom lives in a condominium in Boca Raton, for example, on the ocean, and it seems like every time I go visit her, they're doing some concrete restoration and other work, and it's very frequent. But those buildings take a lot more abuse from the salt water, the wind, the weather, everything that comes off the ocean.
Yeah,
price.
Yeah, of course. So so coastal, intracoastal, they'll just let them.
It's irrelevant to the fact that it really need to look at it from the structural standpoint. See where saltwater issues are affecting them more than other.
For this condominium where we are right now, it's every 8 to 10 years we're having to do concrete restoration.
Makes sense.
That's pretty much the rhythm. Where we know we're finished. We're going into the next thing, and you're planning to do it again. Yeah, this is my office here. So, and I own this office.
Okay.
No, this is an office condominium, so I own this office.
Okay.
And that's how I wound up getting on the board. because yeah.
Okay.
So that's how.
Makes sense.
So the bottom floor is all commercial and the top is all residence.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So we know that it had some iterations from where it started, and so is there some topics you want to talk about before I go into some of the questions I have?
Well, I would just say that the big issue was special legislative session where we're dealing with property insurance issues, dealing with SURFSIDE issue. Also dealt with some other things during that special session. It was important to get something done. We were actually during a regular session tried to get something done before that, right after the fall of the building. That didn't happen. When we came back in special session, this became one of those topics. When I say special session, any legislative session outside of the normal 60 days where we're called, it could happen. We could have one tomorrow. The governor could say you need to be here tomorrow. That was where this happened, and during that time, and to be very clear, there's a hierarchy in politics, and if you're in a majority like I am in Tallahassee, which I was not here in Broward, for the most part, you're going to give some special consideration to your leadership. This bill was actually run by the leader of my class, Danny Perez, who's in Miami. We were not able to convince leadership at that time that we needed to have a glide path to reserves, and thus Senate Bill 154 came out that next session, and that's kind of really where we made some accommodations for the fiscal side of things as well as the safety side. Okay. Yeah, so the fiscal side is a big one. So obviously there's pros and cons to requiring fully funded reserves. We know that that's what's really going to affect. That was the scary part from the beginning. Because they said, and fully funded reserves now. That's what. That's where I was like, "What do you mean, January 1st, 2025? They have to have fully funded reserves? That's going to be really hard for a lot of people to do." So I did like the change, and I know that I've heard you speak about this before. So the change that they did to the fully funded reserves, just to make it more manageable for the condominium owners. Yeah. So once you have your milestone inspection, then your structural integrity reserve study, and you determine, say in condominium X, you're going to need a roof in 10 years. You need concrete restoration in 5 years. Whole list of things that need to be done from a life safety standpoint, not a summer kitchen out by the pool, or the marble floors inside the lobby or the gym, but the things that you need to have in order to make sure people in that building are safe. Those are now on what we call a glide path, and this is something I believe in. Obviously, we all believe in the safety of the building, but we also believe that we didn't want to see seniors all the way down to working professionals kicked out of their building because they can't afford it. And then how marketable is that unit if they know that that's coming down the road in a year and a half? So the way it is now is if your reserve study says your roof needs to be replaced in 10 years, and the roof is $1 million, and there's 100 units, it's 1/10 of 1/100th of $1 million every year, and that way those dollars will be funded. One of the other things I would say, and you probably have some thoughts on how reserves are done. I don't know how well it's known, but if you have a reserve account, you're not allowed to earn interest on it, which is crazy because but it's just crazy because if you have money you're putting away
for in there.
So there are some accommodations we want to make in the legislature, which will get to one of your other questions which is probably, are we going to deal with this again? And I think the answer is yes.
So do you think that the interest was because associations are really not for profit, and that's why it was originally? That's such a weird requirement.
It's a long time Florida
weird law.
Business, if you will, and condo law. I was always asked because I replaced George Moritas, who was a real estate attorney. And he always ran the condo bill. And I said, do you want to run the condo bill? And I said, absolutely not. I mean, it's an important issue. I'll vote on it. I'll take a strong position on it. And safety and keeping these buildings in good shape is important to me. But it wasn't an area where I wanted to be the tip of the spear on. But we're all becoming a little bit of experts on it.
After what happened. And there was a lot of factors for what happened. So, but this is addressing some things that probably should have come a long time ago. So I think buildings, like for this building, it's always voted pretty much for partial reserves, and then they just assessed for repairs, and then they finance them, and You know, and I've seen a lot of other buildings just from real estate perspective where they've already been going out and doing assessments so that they can fund their reserves. Like they've kept up with their work, but they don't necessarily have enough money in their account to fully fund their reserves, so they're also taking care of that in that way. I think the buildings that we really have to be aware of that could have a problem are the ones who were always voting no reserves, which should probably not have ever been allowed, and then not necessarily doing all the work that they need to maintain.
I think a lot of this is just like anything else in life or business. It's extremes, right? There's the vast majority of us want to be as responsible as we can within our budget. Yeah, make sure the kids' college is paid for. Make sure, you know, you have some money in the bank. God forbid anything happens. But I mean, these condominiums are, you know, microcosms of a, you know, small government and a large business. And you know, when you're talking about kicking the can down the road at your house, if there's a leak in your roof or your pool has a leak, you put a little more water in it. It's not the end of the world, but when you have hundreds, if not, you know, more people relying on it, you want to make sure that the systems are safe. Yeah,
I mean, a leak in your own roof affects you and your family, not other people. So, like, I think.
But if that roof collapses and God willing nobody's hurt, it's not anybody else's responsibility other than yours because you kicked the can down the road. So, I mean, that's kind of the thought with a lot of the buildings is everybody needs to have some skin in the game, but we don't want to run people out of their buildings for sure.
It'll take that option off the table. It won't even be an option anymore. I actually appreciate that from a real estate perspective because now I don't get the questions. Do they have reserves? How many reserves do they have? What, you know, construction have they done? Like, we're really looking at that right now for buyers and sellers, because we're just seeing where the building is, like what they can anticipate. I know the big thing that's going to affect how much they need for reserves is that structural integrity study. And before, we always did the 10-year reserve study. That's how we figured out how much money we were going to need. And that was done by just third-party companies. They didn't have to be licensed engineers or architects. So now you have somebody with a license on the line that's quantifying what those amounts are going to be for the future. So I think we can all estimate that it's going to be more.
Accurate.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things, and we'll call it Bill 1, 4D, the original bill contemplated at some point in this process, during the process, putting property management firms' licenses on the line. And I mean, that got a really swift response from you know, our friends at, you know, Campbell, Castle, all the big, you know, the big property management, for services, those type of companies. And so we pulled off of that, but to your point, it was initially all that sat on the county at the time. Steve Geller was mayor, put a committee together, and I sat on it with Fred Nesbitt from the Galt here and some other folks, and a structural engineer, Daniel Average, and we had this whole multiple meetings. We had this whole process of determining what should be done when we still don't know to this day what happened at Champlain Towers. That said, we looked at, you know, a lot of these issues were kind of the way things were done and the way things should be done. And to your point, a lot of the buildings were people whose grandparents, you know, parents and grandparents retired to Florida. They're in there. Oh, it's cheap, buy a condo. And if you're not really worried about the roof today because you're 93 years old, you're going to kick the can down the road. And, you know, if you're on the board and you're a voting member, there might be a lot of people in that situation, and it's not good for the building. So we had to strike a balance in between affordability as well as safety. To me, because you don't want the whole association to collapse either. Right, and to your point on where I was going with that is we went from requiring a structural engineer for tens of thousands of buildings in the state of Florida to now it can be an engineer, an architect would be the lead in the design group, but you're also going to have other people in the construction field doing the inspections. Which and then it's like kind of that next step. If I think I see something here, there's a crack in the wall, there's a issue with a column, or there's water stains somewhere, then they do dig deeper, and they might phase 2, they might go do some core drilling and figure out what's going on underneath. Right. So from phase 1, which is the visual by the professional, and then phase 2 into the other one. So that was something that we know that's going to be more expensive because you have those licenses behind it, but it'll also be more accurate. Right. And so that'll be good for everyone. In the long run, it will. That's the goal. All right. So you think you're going to meet again and make more changes? So there's no way to tell right now. In other words, whether it would be this year, but I think I have one more term in the Florida House, which would be starting in 2024. So technically 3 more years in the Florida House if I am reelected in 2024. And I think within that time we'll at least have one more look at this, if not 2. I mean, it's we've kind of said it's really akin to school safety, voting security. There's certain things we're just going to take up, at least if not every year, every other year, and just look at what can be tweaked to make sure people who live in condominiums are safer. Kids who go to school are safe.
So looking 2 to 5 years down the road, which I think is what it's going to take for this all to shake out. Whether, because some are going to do, some condominiums are going to do well. They're already preparing. Some are not.
Right.
Some are going to struggle. Like in the end, at the end, when all of that is finished, what do you see as the positives of this whole thing coming through for the entire state, and some of the big changes that I think we'll see?
Yeah, I think it's clear. We'll have buildings that are safer, buildings that are better kept, right? You know, your important issues. I always say that, you know, when a community is doing underground water lines or sewer lines, it's not sexy, right? You can't see, it's not new landscaping, it's not a park, it's not brick paved sidewalks, it's the necessities. But it's when you realize how important something is, i.e., you know, a flood in Fort Lauderdale or sewer issues, how important that infrastructure is. And really these are the bones that need to be in good shape to keep the building not just vertical but in good shape, and your resale value. I mean, when you're selling a unit, you want to be able to say, well, they replaced their generator, you know, their pool deck is solid, and, you know, yes, they have nice pavers over it, but more importantly, the pool deck, which is over the garage, for example, is solid. Right. So things like that, and, you know, that I think people can feel good about their investment. Yeah,
I agree. I think in the long run that it's going to be a good thing, and I think there will be some negative impact for some communities that have not been keeping up with reserves and all of that, and may have a large percentage of fixed income you know, owners and things like that. So there'll be a few of those, but I think it's sad, and I do get those calls, you know, but I'm trying to tell them, like, you either have to be ready for what's coming and the bills that are coming, or be prepared to sell, you know, in the next couple of years for those groups.
I mean, and you know, from the business side of the real estate market, a lot of those more fixed income communities are typically in Broward, for example, are going to be west. They're going to be Century Village. They're going to be Sunrise Lakes and places where they're typically, some are more than 3 stories, but a lot of them are low rise. But if they are, you know, not saying it's the right answer, but, you know, we've seen on Pompano Beach in Fort Lauderdale where a property that sat for decades, you know, since the 50s and 60s, 2- and 3-story, you know, really cool mid-century condos along the beach are being, you know, bought to put, you know, something much more dense and higher rate of return. So I mean, ultimately, when we say it's sad, I would also say that, you know, if the property is right for a reinvestment by a developer, they may actually get more money than they would have ever gotten if they just decided.
I was going to go down that path because I know your background, so I know you can answer this. So that's what I was thinking, is that it will actually create some opportunity for building more housing. And for development of some of these, like if you have a property that's west that's on 21 acres, how much housing can you build, you know, on that right now? So
and this, you know, I'm not here to talk about it, but, you know, if I'm in Broward County or I'm in my district, we're talking about the Live Local Act, which was $750 million, almost $800 million in housing funds from the state of Florida specifically for workforce housing, or, you know, housing affordability. We passed. It was an epic bill this year. House bill, Senate bill 102 or 120. It was. We'd always talked about dealing with it, and the pushback from places like Broward County were always, well, you have to fully fund Sadowski. Sadowski is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. You could fully fund that thing until the cows come home. You're still not going to get development to happen unless they want to, right? You've got to incentivize it at some level, but the fact is we put funding in for grants, we gave a lot more tools to the locals to be able to change, you know, maybe a defunct golf course, or, you know, if your point 21 acres, you know, sprawling property, to be able to change local ordinances and zoning codes to be able to have higher density, so where you want to have that. So it gave a lot more control to the locals with respect and development with respect to more urban cores, so downtown Fort Lauderdale, Pompano Beach.
Yeah, I saw in the last change, and I think it was 154, right, in the condo, Florida condo safety law. So I saw that some of the stuff is going to go back to local municipalities and ordinances instead of everything being that structural engineer. Well, there wasn't enough structural engineers to do it.
And it was that's kind of that piece that we talked a little bit about, whether or not, you know, coastal or saltwater issues affect something. You know, the locals, the local environmental and licensing and building department of Broward County would know better than somebody sitting in Tallahassee.
That's I mean, I know that Miami and Broward would be prepared for that because they do the 40, 50-year inspection. So they're they already have.
And once we do this 25, 30-year kind of baseline, you know, the milestone inspection, then you'll have every 10 years. And, you know, think about it. I mean, 10 years is not a long period of time. It's also not a short period of time. You're going to walk around your property at your house and say, oh, my garage door needs some work, you know. Pool screen's got some, you know, broken pieces and whatnot, and you want to take care of some of those things. So it gives the condo associations the ability to see where they are and true up those reserves. Yeah,
and no board can stop them.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like the law, and it is, and you have to do it that way. So I like that. Is there anything you want to add?
You know, what's interesting is with respect to condos, and we're sitting here on Gulf Ocean Mile. You know, this is certainly not the only place like this, but it's very unique in that fact that the association has grown to 35 buildings. It gives you know, these little microcosms of mini governments and boards of directors. I think it puts some seriousness in what they're doing. I mean, they're not just you're not just getting, you know, elected by the board because you're willing to spend, you know, one day a month, you know, sitting talking about the finances of the building and what needs to be done. But hopefully, you know, people will look at it and say, well, we got a real estate broker on here, we've got an architect, we've got a retired banker, or whatever it is, and put some thought into that building, because you really have the life and safety of all the unit owners in that building, and as well as their investment. Yeah, I agree. My 2 cents at the end of that is, we say, oh, okay, we're making the board accountable, but at the same time, we're giving the property managers, associations, the leverage to say this is the law, and this is what we have to do. And those, to your point, those professional management companies that condominiums hire, there's a lot on their plate. Not just, you know, security and safety at the front desk, but you know, making sure that, you know, they have some interpretation of, you know, when a roofer comes to give you an estimate, hopefully 2 or 3 different roofers, you can help you know, interpret that to the unit owners that may not have any expertise in that area. Thanks for coming. Good to see you. It's a pleasure. So I appreciate what you're doing. You as well. I appreciate what you're doing for the industry. It's important. Yeah, we're getting it. I mean, I know that the association attorneys and all of those, they're all talking about this stuff, and engineers are on YouTube, but people aren't connected to them directly. So it's like the information has to come through realtors, I think. One of the last things I would add, and we didn't talk about it, but there was a glitch in that first bill that basically required everyone to have flood insurance. Yes, and as of July 1st, I believe, or something like that, on the 10th floor. Yeah, if you're on the 10th floor and you have a flood, we all have bigger problems, as we would say, but the reality is now you're only dealing with that from a standpoint of where that would affect. Right. So. Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Good fixes. Thanks. Awesome. I think